A call under the moonlight in the dimness. The lunar words made Barbara's heart race faster, and she blushed unconsciously, biting her lip. All right, she whispered, her voice carrying a shy glimmer of hope. Are you really coming? Of course, he replied, and the phone line cut off with the ringback tone. Barbara set the receiver down on the table, staring out the window. In a few hours, dawn would break, the time when she had to return to her final refuge, the grave that had become her home. Memories were tangled and confusing. She could hardly discern whether she wished to go back or clung to this world solely because of the remnants of her love for Stephen. Stephen called Barbara every night, striving to maintain a connection with the fragment of life that remained within her. He made jokes, whispered tender words, and sometimes fell silent on the line, fearful of taking the next step, scared to witness what she had become after her return. He awaited morning because the twilight frightened him, terrified of facing the coldness and unfamiliarity that pierced through her reflection. His thoughts oscillated between the dread of losing her and the hope for a miracle inspired by Lazar, a mysterious agent from the Life Extension Agency. Lazar was an enigmatic figure, a mediator between the living and the semi living. He possessed knowledge about a drug called Rivivitrol, which enabled Barbara's body and soul to remain partially open and half alive after death. Scott, the official name of Stephen in documents, signed a contract to extend his wife's life in a moment of despair. Now he was being denied that chance. The termination was explained as impossible because there was no medicine capable of deactivating the resurrectrol. Lazar repeatedly warned about the side effects, which included a gradual loss of memory, emotions, hearing, and sight. However, Scott remained indifferent to these consequences until he saw Barbara for the first time after her death. Agatha, the agency's administrator, always listened attentively to stories like Scott's, and sadness and fatigue from others' suffering were reflected in her eyes. Her voice was gentle when she tried to advise that such conditions were unique and nobody truly knew how body and soul would respond to requests to stay or leave. Very few of the resurrected kept clear memories or the strength to resist the pull toward their living loved ones. Agatha warned, the place of return always remains unchanged, while faces and emotions may blur and fade. She herself dreamed of a day when technology would bring peace even to these half-living beings. Stephen felt confused and exhausted by endless night calls and silent meetings. He was afraid to look into Barbara's eyes since she had become a stranger. His heart was torn because the woman he once loved was now only a shadow of her former self. He could not even touch her, fearing to break the fragile boundary between life and death. A chasm had formed between them, one only understood by those caught in such an unusual fate. Doubts tormented him along with the desire to understand what remained of that vibrant Barbara he had loved buried within this half-living woman. At the same time, he longed for a meeting, hoping to hear familiar words and feel warmth. Emery, an old friend and psychologist, was Stephen's last hope. He had helped many patients come to terms with the inevitable, taught them how to live with loss, and accepted the phenomenon of resurrection as a certainty of the new era. During one session, he advised Scott not to give in to irrational fears, explaining that the half alive perceive reality differently. Emery said that memory could return if Barbara was given time and allowed to be herself without pressure or unrealistic expectations. They often get stuck between worlds, but love and attention can help find the way, he said softly, looking into the eyes of the tormented man. Meanwhile, Barbara fought her darkness every night, making her way to the grave, to the red satin-covered boards that were her final refuge. Her breathing grew faint and stale, as though something inside was slowly dying along with her memories and emotions. The golden glow of the lamps blinded her eyes, and the night's coolness sometimes sent chills through her, yet her body felt no pain. An emptiness settled deep in her soul, impossible to fill with words or touch, Occasionally, images of Dominic from the past surfaced, a mysterious figure whose memory shone brightly like sparks in the dark. For Barbara, he represented something lost and unresolved. Zoe, resurrected earlier, became a symbol for Barbara and Stephen that they sometimes looked at with both hope and fear. She had learned to embrace her new existence with grace, seeking meaning in the transformations and adapting to live within that half world of emotions and memories. Her fate served as both a caution and a source of inspiration. People like Zoe reminded others that even amid shadows and partial lives, one could find a spark capable of warming and guiding the way. Stephen, treading the cold paths through the graveyard, was unaware of how fragile the world tied together by such delicate threads of remembrance and feeling truly was. She longed to return to the peace she expected in the aging wooden chest, yet a lingering unease remained deep within her, as if an inner voice whispered of unavoidable changes ahead. Her heart beat with less strength than before, and the mist in her eyes only grew thicker. Each breath brought a wave of melancholy, the sorrow of knowing what could never be reclaimed. Scott sat in the room staring at the comb tangled with Barbara's hair, striving to hold on to a fragment of her through the objects that surrounded the family hearth. The silence that settled felt unbearable. He knew that tomorrow would demand confronting reality, visiting the agency, uncovering why Barbara had failed to come, and how many more times this cruel cycle of uncertainty and anguish would repeat. Who could provide answers to the questions echoing within the emptiness of his soul? Night blurred the boundary between the living and the dead, pushing everyone to seek light and purpose. Meanwhile, a new darkness approached as the winter moonlight gently touched the window panes, promising changes and revelations hidden within destiny's arrows. Stephen clenched the cold comb in his hand, bracing himself for the conversation to come. It could have changed everything, unveiling the secrets surrounding the half living Barbara, and perhaps revealing a path toward a new world where love triumphs over memory and fear. He was aware that many steps still lay ahead along the narrow trail between shadows and light, and this journey was only beginning. Returning to the living shadows, moonlight filtered into the room like a transparent veil, casting a cold silver glow over everything. The silence was shattered by the sharp ring of the phone. Barbara jerked suddenly in her chair, squinting and turning her head toward the source of the sound. Her voice was hoarse as she whispered, "Hello." On the other end came the familiar, warm yet uneasy voice of Stephen. "My sunshine, I will come tonight at midnight. Please do not lock the door from inside and wear your most beautiful lingerie." Embarrassment flushed Barbara's cheeks and she nervously bit her lip. Then she replied with a slight smile, "Okay, but are you really coming?" The line filled with rapid beeps as if Stephen could not continue the call. Barbara set down the phone and looked out the window. In a few hours, dawn would break. Its light would mark the time to return to the cemetery, to the place that had become her new home. The girl's eyes widened in confusion. At that moment, a quiet, hoarse laugh sounded from the depths of the room, strange and almost otherworldly. Who could that caller have been? Since then, it might be that these memory lapses were caused by the drug Voskrevotrol, which Stephen insisted be administered immediately after the heart stopped. Doctors had warned about such side effects, but the man paid attention only to his unraveled heart and hope. Yet perhaps the gradual deterioration of parts of the brain made her world increasingly blurred, signaling the possible loss of hearing, sight, or touch. Every evening Stephen tried to reach Barbara by phone. His voice sounded sometimes light-hearted and playful, other times heavy with silent pain. He never dared to show up where she was during nighttime visits. He feared seeing her not as he remembered her before, but cold, half alive and distant. He was afraid that joy would turn into fear, that their love would dissolve into the emptiness between worlds. That day, Stephen went to a life extension agency, attempting to cancel his contract, one of those agreements made under emotional pressure. However, Agatha, a young administrator with sad eyes and thin lips, explained that stopping the effect of the Revivotron was impossible. No one had yet created an antidote to permanently put the brain and body of the half living to rest. The only option was to stop the heart again, but this was not yet legalized and carried unpredictable consequences. The man turned toward the exit as if resisting a spell. Then, without looking back, he said, I was foolish. I cared too much. I thought revival would bring back everything as it was. But she is no longer the same. She is half alive. Her soul belongs only partly to herself. I understood this the moment I saw her at the doorstep after the funeral for the first time. She just walked past me. I felt like a stranger in a cold place and was terrified to step inside my own home. Barbara now sat in our apartment every night. She awaited me. Perhaps she was waiting. But why? I was afraid to touch her, afraid of the apartment itself. The contract forbade changing the place where the deceased returns. I remembered that phrase. That was why I stayed here. Maybe try talking to her? Ask her not to come, Agatha suggested. However, such cases were almost unheard of. Usually, the half living only retained an attachment to the living they loved. They might forget faces, but always remembered the place. Stephen shrugged sadly. So, what should I do now? I'm losing my mind. Others somehow manage, the girl replied gently. We have psychologists who specialize in denial of reality. They can help. No need, he interrupted, leaving the office quickly to avoid any questions. Barbara hurried to the cemetery. Today her soul was filled with strange unease. Everything around seemed familiar, yet alien at the same time. The entrance hall where she had lived, the path others who were half alive took, the fence separating the living world from the beyond. The light from the lamps irritated her and forced her to hide in the shadows. Sharp twigs scratched her heels, but Barbara did not feel pain. It was only a restless feeling inside that tormented her. Her breath seemed stale and lifeless. Fatigue held back every movement, and her thoughts longed to return to the resting embrace hidden beneath the boards of her grave. Stephen came home just before dawn. At the entrance, he met Barbara once again. He wanted to say something, but the words got caught in his throat. She appeared paler and colder than the last time. They passed by silently like distant strangers, hiding their exchange from prying eyes. The house felt empty without her presence. Her hair rested on the comb. Every evening, Barbara would carefully comb through each strand, leaving the comb exactly where it always stayed. Stephen wondered if she truly understood what was happening to her. A dark cloud settled over him. He realized something had to change. Time could not be wasted. He prepared a candle-lit dinner, hoping to make their evening together special. He eagerly awaited the moment to speak openly with her, to share his fears and listen. Will she understand me? Stephen whispered to himself as he looked at the strand of her hair. He gently tugged on a few hairs. They snapped as if from a living being. It is decided, he said, and smiled through tears. Meanwhile, Barbara tried to breathe the light air, but could not detect any sense. The noises of the city gradually faded away, while she drifted into silence as if transported to another world. The realization that she might be better off in a grave brought tears, yet there were no tears or pain for her mother. I must reach the grave quickly, the thought flashed through her mind. Faster, faster! Guided by the gentle spell of the dim light, she almost felt her way along the path. Straight ahead, she saw the familiar roof of her modest home. She climbed inside, lay down, and the world filled with peace. Her body seemed to dissolve into endless waves of calm. His mind sank deeper into slumber. The last fragment of memory struggled to cling to the name, but it slipped away like wind, carrying his recollections into invisible realms above. Night had come once again. Stephen set the table with dinner and lit the candles. He was filled with quiet determination and a flicker of hope. Tomorrow he would go to the agency and ask why Barbara had not returned during the night. The answer would be the same. The drug lost its effect due to the peculiarities of her body. No one could state the exact reason. Yet, unaware of this, he simply sat at the table, turning a comb with her hair between his fingers. This was all that remained of his beloved. You never spoke with your wife, Yennetasongi, Agatha would ask tomorrow. Stephen would only shake his head and hide within the shadows of his own tears sparkling on his face. As their stories intertwined in the silence of the night, the world prepared for a new day that would bring fresh challenges, anxieties, and perhaps answers. Stephen entered the cool chamber of the Life Extension Agency, where the scent of sterility blended with faint hints of aged documents and coffee. Behind the counter stood Agatha, a young woman with delicate lips and expressive eyes that held the weariness and understanding of every sorrow faced by those crossing this threshold. She met his gaze, seemingly sensing his hesitation and pain, and smiled gently. Stephen stepped closer, swallowing hard as he gathered his thoughts. He needed to uncover the truth, the one that could shatter all hopes, but would reveal what he must confront. Have you come, Barbara? How is Stephen doing? Is there anything we can do? Stephen clenched his shoulders as if trying to contain the entire burden of what was happening. Maybe a psychologist could help Barbara reclaim even a fragment of herself. Agatha looked at the computer and smiled, though her smile carried a hint of sadness. We have a specialist named Emery. He has spent many years working with cases like this, including those who denied the reality of their resurrected existence. His techniques do not promise complete recovery, but they aid in enduring the state of oblivion and learning to accept it. If you wish, I can introduce you to him. Stephen, what about your past memories? He now asked with more confidence. Barbara occasionally sees Dominic, a figure from her past. Who is he, and what do those fragmented visions mean? Dominic is the key to her history and possibly to her memory itself. He was a significant part of Barbara's life, but disappeared suddenly and mysteriously. Many who have been resurrected face these kinds of ghostly echoes. Their minds cling desperately to something familiar. For Barbara, Dominic symbolizes lost love and shattered hopes. This unsettles her and prevents her from embracing the new reality fully. Stephen pondered this. He understood that returning to the old life was impossible, but wished to preserve at least a spark of genuine feeling. Agatha shared how Zoe, who was resurrected earlier, became a kind of beacon for others. Her story both inspires and frightens simultaneously. Zoe managed to keep a piece of her soul intact, but paid a heavy price with painful loneliness. Curious, Stephen murmured. Why is it impossible to let Barbara die peacefully? It is not always the agent's choice, Agatha explained. Those who sign the contract do so in a surge of hope and despair, paying no mind to what lies ahead. The drug called Voscoretrol is not a remedy, but a chain binding life and death. It cannot be removed while the mechanism remains active. Contrary to the agency's cold logic, Stephen felt a deep ache within his soul. It seemed to him that Barbara had become a prisoner of a world unknown to him, where memories crumble and emotions dissolve like sand slipping through fingers. He recalled the first time he saw her after the funeral. She had passed by, distant and ethereal. His heart tore apart with conflicting feelings, a tangle of longing, fear, and love. What about the home? Stephen asked seriously. The contract states that the deceased's place of return must remain unchanged. Are we trapped in this cage? Yes, Agatha replied. After a few minutes of discussion, Stephen took a moment to breathe. His mind was flooded with questions that had no answers. Yet his heart held on to hope, yearning to meet Barbara tomorrow evening and finally speak with her openly, without fear or silence. He also thought about his upcoming session with Emery, the psychologist who might help them both navigate this strange reality. As they parted, Agatha whispered as if sharing a secret. The hardest truth to accept is that the person you love changes and will never be the same again. But acceptance is the initial step toward healing, even if it is not complete, at least towards inner peace. Deep within, he knew that everything would change with the arrival of tomorrow. Now his task was not merely to wait, but to try to understand and help Barbara understand herself. Where life ends, a new tale begins, half forgotten, mysterious, and half alive. Stephen was determined to walk this path with her. As the light slowly faded and the city sank into darkness, a firm resolve grew in the man's heart to give Barbara a chance to become more than just a shadow of the past, to become a part of the present. Tomorrow would mark the start of the next chapter in their struggle, filled with discoveries and perhaps new hopes. The soul's fears and doubts lingered. Moonlight gently spilled into the room, casting cold silver shades on the walls. The silence was broken by the ringing of the phone. Barbara, sitting in the chair, jumped slightly and squinting, answered with a voice as soft as a whisper. "Hello," she said. A tender male voice that belonged to Stephen replied, "My dear, I will be there at midnight tonight. Do not lock the door and wear your most beautiful lingerie." After a brief, chilly pause, she blushed and, holding back a smile, asked, "Are you sure you'll come?" "Definitely. I cannot talk anymore. Sorry," he said before the line went dead. Barbara set the phone down and, staring out the window, pondered the coming dawn, which meant returning to the cemetery, to her grave. A hoarse, nervous laugh echoed in the empty room. One wonders who that could have been. Since the moment Barbara left, several months had passed since every night she returned to the house, and the grave they had dug became her second home. At first, the silence inside was only broken by the faint whispers of underground insects. Now, however, water rising from beneath the earth began to erode her shelter and collapse the walls. What troubled her more were the growing gaps in her memory that consumed larger parts of her mind. She struggled to comprehend why she returned each evening to the living and what purpose she served outside her own grave. These strange memory lapses might have been side effects of the drug Voskrevotrol, administered by Stephen after her heart had stopped. Stephen was thoroughly warned about the risks, but love had overshadowed his concerns. Barbara was losing her hearing and sight, slowly drifting away from the realm of the living as if her body was fading into oblivion. Stephen paid Lazar and Agatha substantial sums every month. They were mystical intermediaries and the agency's life extension administrators, yet none of their documents could promise a full revival. The entire technology was still experimental and profoundly flawed. Each night Stephen called Barbara. His voice brimmed with tenderness and worry. He attempted to joke and flirt, keeping their connection alive but never dared to enter her space. Fear of finding her changed, cold and foreign tormented him. He was terrified that his memories of her might fade as well, replaced by emptiness and a half-alive shadow. This internal struggle consumed him more and more. Love battled with the fear of losing not only his wife, but also the memory of her. That evening, Stephen arrived at the agency demanding to cancel the contract. He realized he could no longer bear watching Barbara slowly fade away from this world, leaving them both isolated. However, Agatha answered him gently yet firmly that there is no medicine capable of stopping the effects of Voskrevotrol at this time. She explained that attempting another cessation of life would essentially be a second death, which is neither legally allowed nor morally acceptable. "Why did you even pay for the extension?" asked the administrator with thin lips and tired eyes. Stephen, turning towards the door, admitted aloud for the first time, "I was a fool, too much in love, too hopeful for a miracle, but she's no longer the same." His voice trembled, highlighting the tragic nature of the situation. "Her soul was half lost. Memory slipped away like the wind, and I am afraid to touch it." Barbara, descending into the cool stairwell that evening, felt a strange rejection. The familiar world had become nonsense and cold. Thin rays of the lanterns cut sharply into her eyes, and her body was uncooperative as before. She sensed exhaustion, as if breathing had grown heavy and muffled. Her limbs disobeyed her will, and her mind slowly sank into the darkness of oblivion. A glimmer of hope, a wooden board covered with red satin, her temporary refuge where she could at least partially find some peace. At that moment, Stephen and Barbara listened closely to the silence, trying to catch any sound or scent, yet all she could feel was emptiness. No trace of tuberose fragrance remained, nor the city's distant buzz that gradually faded from her awareness. She reached out toward her own grave as if it were her final refuge, the only place where safety still lingered. If only I would not wake up tomorrow. If only I would not return there, she murmured into the emptiness, her eyes, cold and dry, gently shut, slowly sinking her into an uncertain slumber. Stephen was overwhelmed by the situation. Meanwhile, Lazar and Agatha continued their duties. Lazar, possessing arcane wisdom, understood that Voskrevotrol was far more than mere technology, serving as a peculiar bridge between life and death, a loop of fate impossible to escape without sacrifice. Agatha, observing the clients, realized that fear, mixed with fragile hope for a miracle, compelled people to take such risks. She saw Barbara as an emblem of what a half alive existence could represent: hope and loss, suspended between the realms of existence and oblivion. Dominic's appearance in Barbara's memories filled her heart with a lingering melancholy. This mysterious figure from the past stirred faint emotions, slipping through her mind like flames escaping between fingers. Meeting Zoe, a woman resurrected earlier, added both meaning and warning. Zoe embodied their living symbol, a token of hope and simultaneously a reminder of how difficult it was to preserve humanity within this drawn out half dead state. The night grew quieter, and Barbara once again embarked on her journey between worlds. Stephen, on the other hand, prepared for the evening, hoping their conversation at Rory in Cox Danzesi would mark a new beginning. Healing allows one to confront fears and uncover a path through the shadows of the past. In the hearts of the characters, love, intertwined with despair, a struggle against loss mixed with a longing to reclaim life as it once was. As the evening quietly draws to a close, a new chapter begins where past and present merge, and emotions along with memories become the deciding forces in the fight for a second chance and the right to be called human. The past knocks upon the door of memory. Moonlight gently cloaked the room in a cold glow, as if trying to warm its ghostly space. Barbara sat in a chair, staring into the void, seemingly searching for answers in the reflections of the lunar light. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a sharp ring of the phone. She flinched, feeling something tighten in her chest. With a husky voice, she answered, "Hello, my sunshine. I will come tonight at midnight. Do not lock the door from the inside, and please wear your most beautiful lingerie." A moderately pleasant male voice sounded, causing Barbara to blush awkwardly and bite her lower lip. "All right," she replied, smiling in the darkness. "But are you really coming?" "Of course I cannot talk anymore. Sorry," the dial tone sounded in the receiver. After placing the handset on the table, Barbara directed her gaze to the window. Dawn was approaching, signaling the inevitable return to the place she now inhabited, her grave. The thin girl's eyes were wide open. The silence was broken by a hoarse, nervous laugh, seemingly coming from the farthest corner of the room. One wonders who could have called from there. However, the loss of memories was unavoidable as a side effect of the drug Voskrevotrol, which Barbara's husband Stephen insisted be administered immediately after her heart stopped. The consultants had been honest, warning about these potential consequences. Stephen nodded silently and made a decision that now seemed impossible to reverse. Alternatively, the memory deterioration could have resulted from the brain's cells dying, which might lead to a complete loss of sensation and perception. Every new day filled Barbara with fear that she might lose her hearing, sight, and the ability to feel the world around her. Stephen called Barbara at night. His voice sometimes joked, sometimes fell silent. He did not visit her, afraid to see a changed face, unloved and unfamiliar. He feared experiencing terror instead of joy again. He was anxious about growing accustomed to this cold and half-alive being that his wife had become. Today, Stephen came to the Life Extension Agency to request the termination of the contract. He understood the futility of trying to prolong life in such a form. Agatha, the young administrator with sad eyes, regretfully informed him that cancelling Voskrevotrol's effects was impossible. There were no medications capable of calming the body and halting the dying process forever. Have you tried killing her again? She asked cautiously. No, the man sighed. There is only one, but it will not solve the problem. The law does not cover responsibility for repeated killing. And who can guarantee the body will not revive once more? Stephen murmured, looking down. Why did you even ask to extend her life then? It meant a fortune. And yet you are here yourself. Agatha wondered in confusion. I was foolish, overwhelmed with hope that everything would be as it once was. But she can never be the same again. Half alive, her soul has partly departed. A man's voice cut through the pain. I understood it after the funeral when I saw her for the first time by the entrance. She did not recognize me and passed right by, cold, pale, and distant. I was even afraid to return inside the house. Now she comes back every night, waiting for me or something else, but why? He was afraid to touch her. He could not change the apartment due to contract conditions. The place where the deceased returns must remain unchanged for the entire duration of the treatment. Perhaps we should try talking to her. Agatha showed compassion. In truth, we have never encountered a case like this before. We do not know how the body will respond to such a request. Usually, only the longing for loved ones remains in memory. Faces may be forgotten, but places are always remembered. Stephen looked at her with despair. What should we do? His voice was strained. Others live with the resurrected, the girl sighed. Maybe it is time to consult a psychologist. We have skilled specialists for denial of reality. No, it is not worth it, the man interrupted her as he left the office. Barbara hurried to the cemetery. She felt strange, burdened, and alien. Everything around seemed both familiar and distant at once. The entrance, that posed by the path, the fence, it all felt like a heavy, oppressive memory. The patches of lantern light irritated her, forcing her to avoid them and stumble over sharp sticks and stones. She did not feel pain, but her breath seemed stale and lifeless. In despair, she longed for one thing only to dissolve into the peace that awaited beyond the boards and the atlas. Stephen returned home before dawn. At the doorway they met again. He wanted to say something, yet his tongue betrayed him completely. Before him stood not Barbara, but a ghost, colder and more distant than before. They passed each other like strangers, like lovers unwilling to be seen. Inside the apartment, everything recalled the former life. A comb tangled with hair lay on the table. The scent of her perfume lingered. The warmth of past days filled the air. But did she realize who she had become now? Sadness overwhelmed Stephen, engulfing him with sorrow. He intended to resolve the situation because feelings and fears tore at his soul. He decided to ask, will you understand me? Until then, he would never know. He gently tugged on a strand of hair. It snapped just as it would for a living woman. The decision grew within him like poison in his heart. He prepared a candle-lit dinner to preserve at least the illusion of normalcy. Meanwhile, Barbara listened to the silence, unable to sense any odors from the sounds of the world. The city's noise faded away. The world became colorless and empty. She understood the full weight of her predicament and wished for only one thing: to reach her grave quickly, to sink into rest and to forget. Her body was wasting away, her mind trying to recall a familiar face, but the words slipped away, dissolving into the air. Fog clouded her consciousness, and a thin veil cloaked the silent emptiness. Meanwhile, Stephen eagerly awaited her arrival, preparing dinner and arranging candles on the table. He had no idea what news the agency would bring him tomorrow. Perhaps it would be about the premature discontinuation of the medication due to Barbara's unique physiology. Yet for now, he only fidgeted with one single object, a comb tangled with her hair, his last tangible connection to a life left behind. You never spoke to her? A young woman from the reception unexpectedly asked, observing him through the glass door. Stephen silently shook his head and hid his eyes. Large tears glistened there. These were the tears of a man burdened by an unbearable weight of half-alive love, doomed to dwell between worlds. In this darkness of memory and feeling, in the fragile realm between life and death, the past knocked once more, forcing each of them to decide whether to hold on to what once was or release it forever. An unwelcome heaviness of existence. Moonlight filtered through the curtain, flooding the room with a cold, pale moisture, as if night itself tried to touch Barbara. She sat in an armchair, trembling from an unknown fatigue and heaviness that was sensed in every movement, even in her breath. This unwanted burden of existence infused her with hopelessness and despair. Her body was only half alive. Time stretched endlessly. Memory became tangled, like fog diluting the vivid colors of a lost world. Barbara peered into the darkness, trying to catch a familiar silhouette vanished in the maze of hazy recollections. Suddenly, the phone rang sharply. The sound pierced the silence, tearing through the thick veil of solitude. Barbara struggled to lift the receiver. Stephen's voice trembled, filled with both worry and affection, tenderness and fear. My dear, I will come tonight before midnight. Do not lock the door. Wear the lingerie I adore. These words made her heart race, yet alongside the warmth came a bitter taste. The man feared seeing her like this, half alive, distant. Barbara nodded in response, though her voice was fragile and far away. I will, surely. Several months had passed since Barbara ceased to be fully alive, sinking into a new form of existence. The world that once burst with colors, sounds, and feelings gradually grew more ghostly. Groundwaters rose higher and higher, eroding the cemetery soil that hid her body. A new cold home. Deep within it, remnants of her former self decayed. Awareness drifted uncertainly between past reality and emptiness. She felt the pain of loss. Her fading memory tormented Barbara more than the passing days and nights, breeding a hopeless longing. Her mind often wandered without direction, and sometimes she failed to understand why she had to return here, to cold stone slabs and narrow moss covered paths. An invisible force pulled her back, scraping the earth with claws as if desperate to reach something forgotten. In the evenings, she dragged herself out of the grave, weak and unsteady, painfully aware of the absence of former strength. Moving among marble monuments, she faintly caught the wind's breath and rustle of leaves, but these sounds were mute and dissolved into the void. Stephen, her husband, wrapped in conflicting emotions. Every evening he called Barbara. His voice on the line shifted from tenderness to desperate silence. He dreaded facing her half-living appearance and shattered soul. He did not know what to expect, joy or fear. Yet attempts to cancel the life extension agreement, which he had signed in a moment of panic and love, were in vain. The agency assured him that a remedy to sever the link with the resurrection serum did not yet exist. This was a technological and ethical dead end. Lazar, a mystical intermediary between worlds, lingered nearby like a shadow, emphasizing the helplessness of human will. A whirlwind of doubts and pain dragged Stephen into the depths of despair. He visited the agency hoping to annul the contract, but the face of Agatha, a young yet sorrowful employee, reflected the echoes of countless stories without happy endings. Her heartfelt advice to seek help from a psychologist, which he eventually followed, became his last hope to save both spirit and heart. Emery, an old friend and psychologist, listened attentively, guiding the man toward acceptance of the inevitable and preparing him to face the burdens of half-life. Meanwhile, Barbara awakened to new fears. Her body relentlessly reminded her with strange sensations, heaviness in the chest and emptiness in the soul. Her lungs felt clogged with stagnation. Breathing echoed faintly the days of the living. The absence of scents and sounds, the plunge into painful silence, drained her strength. Memories of Dominic, a mysterious man from a broken past, surfaced like ghosts. He appeared to her as an indistinct shadow, stirring both unease and a tender melancholy. His image flickered on the border between sleep and wakefulness, causing her heart to stir old wounds. Among the cemetery fences and marble slabs, Barbara felt a strange connection with Zoe, a woman revived earlier and transformed into a symbol of hope and caution. Zoe's tales about confronting otherworldly solitude became a kind of compass and lesson for Barbara and Stephen, teaching them that life after death is not an end but a beginning of a new chapter filled with challenges. Yet, unlike Zoe, Barbara sensed the chains of this world tightening around her, making her lose herself with each dawn. The moonlit nights stretched longer, and the conversations between Barbara and Stephen grew increasingly tense. One day, when Stephen arrived home earlier than usual, they met at the entrance, but could not speak a single word. He saw her, pale and distant, half alive, and his heart constricted with pain. For the first time in many months, a determined urge to change the course of events sparked within him. Scott decided to organize a candlelit dinner in an effort to reconnect with Barbara, to awaken the remnants of the person she once was. Meanwhile, with every step, Barbara approached the grave, sensing the world around her becoming blurred and distant. Her body yearned for rest and her heart longed for oblivion. She feared the dawn and the cold reality it would bring again at that very moment. Almost unconsciously, she was overwhelmed by the thought, maybe it would be better not to return at all, not to wake up tomorrow. However, that voice faded into the quiet of a deep sleep that carried her away peacefully. Stephen remained at the table, grasping the comb tangled in her hair, fighting alone against an invisible enemy named loss and loneliness. He could no longer shake the feeling that Barbara had left forever, now existing only between worlds, belonging to none. Time passed, yet no answers came. He dreamed of a meeting, a conversation, an attempt to reclaim what seemed irretrievably lost. Agatha at the reception felt the pain of every visitor. She listened carefully to their stories as if piecing together a mosaic of other people's lives. Sometimes it seemed that even amid this heavy grayness, there were sparks of light, like Zoe. Still, nothing could change the rules or erase, despite technology's cost, the genuine human fears and love. Meanwhile, beyond fleeting hopes and disappointments, a new chapter awaited its heroes. Barbara, caught between heaven and earth, was ready to take the next step, invisible to others but crucial for her soul. Her journey was only beginning to gain meaning, despite the burden of her half alive state and the fragility of memories she tried in vain to hold. Stephen, more determined than ever, understood that to pass through this darkness, they would have to confront not only themselves, but also the secret hidden in the resurrection roll, the mystical promises of Lazar, and the power of forgotten memories awaited them. Although fears and impending losses loomed ahead, he felt for the first time that the moment had come to truly speak with Barbara. Meanwhile, the world was a dialogue with a shadow, the full moon. "You really will come?" she asked, and her only reply was a brief yes. Then the line went silent, leaving only echoes and quiet in the room. Barbara, like a prisoner of her own soul, struggled to claw her way out of the grave, then wandered beneath the moon, past tombstones along narrow paths, tangled like her memories. Stephen could not push Lazar from his thoughts. The mysterious agent's words about the resurrection therapy still echoed in his mind. The treatment allowed life after death, but also brought forgetfulness, memory decay, and a sense of lifelessness. Every time he thought about the boundary beyond which Barbara became a shadow of herself, he clenched his fists. He barely doubted that memory loss and the emptiness were consequences of the chemical intervention he had supported, hoping to restore lost love. But now that hope was fading, giving way to despair. Each evening, calling Barbara, Stephen felt a mix of hope and fear. His wife's voice sounded faint and distant, as though she were dissolving in a fragment of time. She could not remember simple things, moments from their lives, faces of those close to her. Stephen feared to come closer, afraid to see her slipping through his fingers, no longer recognizing their home or him. He prayed, hoping against the growing darkness. To avoid disappointment even tomorrow night, he secretly clung to the faint shadow that remained of his beloved. Playing with fate had backfired when the agency refused to cancel the agreement. The remedy offered no way to turn back, and no one had invented a method to halt the powers of the resurrection. Lazar spoke honestly. The only solution is dying again. Yet the legal aspects of this option were unresolved. On one of those difficult days, Stephen arrived at the agency. At the reception desk, he was greeted by a young woman with weary eyes and thin lips named Agatha. She listened carefully as the man tried to explain that his desire to end the contract was driven by fear and pain. Why did you even pay for extending life? She asked. She asked quietly. You were the ones who reached out to us. His gaze fixed on her crooked smile as he quietly confessed to his mistake, the emotional impulse, and how he now felt about the half living barber, afflicted by a suffering soul that felt partly foreign. Agatha looked at him with sympathy and a gentle sadness, shaking her head while explaining that none of their clients had ever faced this before. Usually, the spirit of the resurrected remains tied to the living's yearning. However, the face, memory, and feelings often grow dim and slip away. Maybe try talking to her, she cautiously suggested. Ask if she can say when she has had enough, but be aware that this comes with risks. Many souls like these find it impossible to resist the urge to stay close to the living, even if it brings pain, and no one can predict how she will respond to rejection. So much depends on that. Stephen sighed. For the first time considering seeking help from friends, he remembered his old companion Emery, a psychologist who focused on denial and emotional trauma. It seemed like the only beacon in the dark hallway of despair. Meanwhile, Barbara felt an increasing sense of alienation from the world around her. Even everyday tasks became heavy burdens. The patches of streetlight irritated her with their brightness. Movements appeared slowed down and pointless. Her breathing grew labored and stale. Fatigue overwhelmed her with every step. She increasingly craved silence, peace, and darkness. The wooden house, lined with red satin, her second prison after the graveyard, felt both comforting and terrifying at once. Stephen, my heart, will you understand? He whispered to himself, searching for support in the quiet apartment. Until I ask, I will never know. He prepared a candlelit dinner, attempting to create an atmosphere where trust could possibly blossom. For now, all he had left besides air and emptiness was hope for a conversation that might mark the start of healing. Barbara greedily inhaled the air, but her emotions were deceptive. They slipped away along with smells and sounds that could no longer reach her senses. The world. The world around her slowly faded into a mist of oblivion, and deep inside, she sensed that in the grave it was easier for her than here, caught between the living and the dead at the same time. Strengthening the whisper, she tried to reach her own being, but memory slipped away as if the wind carried the last threads back to a former life. She found solace, returned to the familiar house draped in red satin, and finally let herself almost dissolve into a drowsy peace and forgetfulness. That was the only rest everyone sought after so many sufferings. Yet even here, her spirit continued to fight for the remnants of its identity, trying to recall at least the name lost along with life. Dawn was slowly breaking. Stephen sat at the table, surrounded by cold food and the flickering candlelight. A comb rested in his hands as if it were the last connection to Barbara. Bitter anticipation haunted his thoughts. Tomorrow he would go back to the agency. There he would be assigned a new case and explain the mysterious early failure that shook him, attempt to uncover the reasons, though no answers awaited. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but last night had changed everything. Stephen had made a decision for the first time. Soon he would face Barbara in person and try to break down the icy walls between them. The conversation with the shadow who had been his beloved would begin and become a trial, opening a new path or a deep fall. In this fragile boundary between life and death, memory and oblivion, hope still lingered. There is still a flicker of light that allows us to hope that sometimes even a half living soul can discover its way back home. The question remains whether they can face this journey together without fear or regrets. As they stand on the threshold of their meeting, the story carries on, filled with mysteries and expectations that make life worth breathing and fighting for. Emery, the psychologist, and the path to acceptance. The faint glow of the lamp in the office cast long shadows on the floor, creeping into the quietest corners. Stephen wearily sank into the chair across from Emery, an old friend and counselor whom he had sought in a moment of deepest emotional crisis. His eyes revealed the anxiety and pain he could no longer suppress. Barbara, Stephen began softly and almost hopelessly. She's like a canvas of vanishing memories and emotions. People say that with each day she becomes more half alive, losing tiny fragments of herself. I do not know how to help her, how to help us. Emery listened carefully, his face calm and steady, the kind of serenity that might guide Stephen toward a path forward. It is a peculiar paradox, the psychologist remarked. This curse grants life, but simultaneously steals a part of the soul, leaving only shadows of the person who once was. Barbara exists as if she is a dusty relic, caught between the worlds of the living and the dead. Perhaps her memories and feelings resemble a fleeting mirage we desperately try to grasp. I saw her last night, Stephen continued. She was paler than mist, and in her eyes flickered a hint of forgetfulness. She was not. She recognized me, yet deep inside there was a lingering fear, as if she was aware of her condition, her half life. I myself dread facing her directly. This fear is familiar to many who encounter such a reality. Emery contemplated. Barbara lives caught between fading memories and the present that feels empty. People like her need an anchor to the world of the living, yet it is just as important for us not to lose ourselves in their shadow. How long does the revival medicine last? Lazar, a life extension agent, warned that the drug comes with unique characteristics and risks. Agatha from the agency said its effects cannot be reversed, and no one knows how long the body and mind can endure such a state. At times it seems like a sentence. I am Stephen. The path to acceptance is difficult, Emery gently reminded us. It begins with the admission that things cannot be restored to how they were. Barbara is now different. She has lost a part of herself, but within her might still burn a faint flame of hope. We can help her hold on to what remains, even if it is not love in the traditional sense. Stephen's mind drifted to Agatha, whose words that bodies given a second life often remember only places and feelings sparked a somber vision of Barbara. Perhaps she recalls the home where garden paths meandered, or scents that have yet to fade from her soul. Or maybe she's lost in a world where memories vanish like escaped shadows. Evening falls. Dominic was stirred by echoes of an old memory related to a mysterious person from Barbara's past whose presence might hold the key to understanding why she's losing strands of her memory. Perhaps this figure represented the part of her that slips away, leaving her recollections faint and blurred. I will help you, Emery responded firmly. Together we will try to reach Barbara, to awaken those parts of her soul that still breathe warmth and light. This is our path, difficult and steep, but the only one available. The night, Stephen held a comb with strands of Barbara's hair, reflecting on the struggle of existing on the edge between life and death. His heart was full of fears and doubts, but also fueled by a love that knows no bounds. He sensed the moment had come to move forward, overcoming his fears to help her find peace and light within herself. Emery prepared for their first encounter with Barbara. He realized that many moments would be painful and require great skill. After all, this was about the soul and memory, about the overwhelming desire to live and love. Everything around seemed unstable and uncertain, yet within this fragile world, love and acceptance became anchors. Ahead lay a new stage of the journey, where each step might bring either enlightenment or collapse. Although the night wind carried away the last shadows, a bridge was forming between him and Barbara, a bridge of trust, pain, and hope leading to the life she must learn to accept and love again. That evening marked the beginning of Stephen and Barbara's journey through the haze of oblivion and the chill of semi living memory. Hidden secrets from the past, forgotten emotions, and fresh revelations were destined to guide them in a world where the line separating life and death blurs more than ever before, and true love faces unprecedented trials. Their tale was only unfolding. In the agency's room reigned an unusual silence, broken only by the faint creaking of a chair. Agatha, the administrator, with a keen gaze and a weary smile, watched Stephen closely. The man sat, clutching a comb with sparse strands of Barbara's hair. His eyes mirrored a blend of despair and hope, as if he tried to grasp time itself within his hands. Agatha understood this object was no ordinary keepsake, but the fragile last link between past and present, life and a half alive existence. She spoke softly as though cautious not to shatter the delicate quiet. Resurrection does not merely revive the body, it pushes the soul to the brink of transformation, though memory remains the most vulnerable element of all. Like many others, Barbara confronts the loss of self and the distortion of the images she once treasured. Her voice held a mixture of sympathy and clinical detachment, as if describing an inevitable, incurable fate. Stephen exhaled deeply. I have turned to Emery, my longtime friend and psychologist. He's searching for a way to help Barbara hold on to some part of who she used to be. Yet with each passing day, I witness her slipping further away, fading into oblivion. Yesterday I saw Dominic again, an old acquaintance from Barbara's past, someone who now exists only in her memories. He appeared like a ghost, a reminder of broken happiness and pain. His words carried a heavy weight, like an admission of his own helplessness. Agatha nodded, lifting her gaze toward the screen displaying information about other resurrected individuals. Zoe was among the first to cross this threshold. Her story serves as a warning not to forget the boundaries that must never be crossed. She became both a symbol of hope and a cautionary tale. Hope that life goes on, and a warning that not every soul can endure this new way of existing. Her voice was filled with genuine sorrow. Tell me more about Zoe. Stephen's heart clenched. What happened to her? Agatha took a deep breath and began to tell her story. Zoe was reborn before all others, and through her strong will, managed to retain not only her memory, but also her emotions. She avoided becoming dependent on attachments, a trap that proved deadly for many in her situation. She succeeded in forming new relationships and even helped others accept themselves in their altered state. Yet such strength came at a steep cost. With each passing day, her body resembled a sculpture carved from stone more and more, and her feelings slowly turned into a cold echo. Stephen sat in thoughtful silence. His mind gradually shifted toward Barbara. What about Barbara? Could she ever become like that? Agatha shook her head. Barbara Sam is entirely different. Her soul seems torn between past and present. She clings to every faint trace of memory, striving to hold on to her emotions, yet simultaneously she breaks under the heavy weight of this struggle. Frequent gaps appear in her mind. She does not recognize those close to her and cannot piece together the fragments of herself. This ordeal pains everyone involved, both her and those who care for her. I fear the day might come when she will stop seeing me altogether. These words came straight from the depths of Scott's heart. Agatha responded calmly. This is indeed one of the most terrifying aspects of continuing life through resuscitation. Sometimes the connection fades until only a shadow of the person remains. At times, these shadows live among us, but we cannot truly reach them because they have become half alive. Stephen gazed out the window, where the evening street glowed weakly with grey patches. It feels to me as though Barbara is nearby, yet hidden behind an invisible wall. I'm uncertain how to be with her when she is present, but at the same time seems like a stranger. Fear and love are intertwined in the silent horror of a separation that is unfinished. His words echoed heavily, as if answering the long accumulated pain. Agatha let out a soft sigh, remembering herself at the start of her career when everything seemed merely theoretical. We have no formula for making this experiment viable without turning the human essence into a ghost. Lazar, our mediator and specialist in resuscitation, often says that the nature of life and death is so intricately linked that a full return is impossible. She smiled bitterly, and in that smile lay many years of observation and mistakes. Lazar, I have heard of him, Stephen noted. People say he is like the keeper of a secret that should never be revealed too much. Many lives rest in his hands. Why does no one try to develop a cure to end their suffering? Agatha looked at him intently. They do try, but this path is full of enigmas. The body to which the soul returns does not always obey the usual biological laws. Some properties of the resurrected cannot be undone. Its impact is permanent. Undoing it would be like a new death. And who would dare to do that? Stephen swallowed, searching for solid ground in his own thoughts. I came to Emery not only for support. I want to understand how to help Barbara let go of the past. But how do you explain to a half living soul that the past is gone forever? His eyes shone with heavy exhaustion, and Agatha, suddenly softer, replied, this is exactly the calling of psychologists like Emery, who work with the resurrected and their loved ones. They try to build bridges between what was and what is now. Sometimes those bridges are thin and fragile, but they are the only hope to preserve even a tiny piece of real life. Their conversation lingered on memory, one of the most painful blanks. Barbara stopped recognizing Stephen, and he was afraid to approach for fear of causing pain. Agatha knew such stories repeated too often. It is not so much a physical state as a barrier between souls. Half-living reality forces them to forget faces. Voices and touches, once the very essence of life, are now replaced by coldness and emptiness. Yet within this chill, sparks of emotion sometimes break through. Those sparks must not be lost. Stephen nervously scratched the back of his head. Recently I saw Barbara at the cemetery. She seemed eager to return to her grave as if that place were her true home, where she is accepted and no longer fears being empty and forgotten. A pause stretched between us. I plan to stay with her tonight at home to talk by candlelight. I want her to feel my presence, even if she does not recognize me. Agatha smiled, sensing a flicker of respect for his resolve. This is a significant step, Stephen. Even if words cannot find their way, being there, offering warmth and light, will help her remember that beyond half-life, there exists a love that cannot be erased by any drug. She held photos of other resurrected souls, including Zoe, whose face radiated with light and a fatherly wisdom at once. Remember her as both a model and a warning. Her story is a lesson for all of us, for you and Barbara. Life after the Podai experience is not an end, but also not a full return to the past. It marks the beginning of something entirely different, and we are all learning what that means together. Her eyes shone seriously in the dim glow of the room as she said, no matter how difficult it is, hearts living on this edge refuse to surrender. As the cold northern wind crept behind the windows, Agatha knew her role was more than managing contracts or extending life. Her mission is to assist those caught between worlds, guiding them to discover new meaning and come to terms with what cannot be changed. She glanced at Stephen, who was already preparing to leave, and softly added barely audible words. You are not alone. We walk alongside you on this unstable path. A faint light shone through the fog of memory. Moonlight filtered through the window, bathing the room in cold silver hues. Barbara sat in an old armchair, her gaze distant and filled with sorrow. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a sharp ringing of the phone. Startled, she turned her head and whispered with difficulty, "Hello?" A voice on the other end was Stephen's, anxious yet comforting. "Barbara, I will come by midnight. Do not lock the door and wear what you love most." The man's words were so tender they made her feel warm, and she bit her lip. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely, I cannot talk any longer." "Sorry." The call ended. Barbara set down the receiver, staring out at the dim glow of street lights. In a few hours dawn would break, and she would have to return once again to the cold embrace of her grave. Inside her rose a haunting feeling of silence and confusion. Who could that have been? A whisper came from a shadowed corner, hoarse and uncertain. Several months had passed since Barbara died. The first weeks were peaceful. The earth was quiet except for the rustle of insects and the whisper of roots. But now water seeped into her dwelling, eroding the walls and sparking an overwhelming sense of impending doom. The most dreadful fear was losing her memory. She could no longer recall faces or voices, and sometimes forgot the very reason why she returned from the grave to the world of the living each night. Something unseen pulled her toward the surface, compelling her to claw through the earth's crust and wander among the tombs. The air carried freshness, yet that freshness both tormented and frightened her all at once. Perhaps new sections of her brain were dying each day. Barbara sensed that her hearing, sight, and even her sense of touch might vanish soon. She drifted like through a mist that enveloped her deeper and deeper. Every evening, Stephen came to the Life Extension Agency with a persistent request to terminate the contract. He wished to end Barbara's suffering, but Agatha, the young and strict administrator with thin lips, refused. The resurrectional drug had irreversible effects, and no one could guarantee peace. "Why did you even start this?" she softly said. "You chose this path, paid a hefty price, believed in a miracle." Stephen paused at the doorway and sighed. "I was foolish and had too much hope. I did not understand that the half dead could never become whole again, that her soul had partly gone away. Later I saw her cold, distant, and I am afraid to touch, afraid of home and change, trapped in this cursed contract." "Perhaps you should try talking to her." Agatha spoke with unexpected concern. "Sometimes they listen and try to understand, although most resurrected cling only to those they loved, forgetting everything else. They almost always remember only the place they return to." "What can I do?" Stephen's voice trembled. "Others manage to live with this. Seek help from a psychologist. We have specialists who work with people unable to accept reality." "No need," interrupted Stephen. He left. Barbara was hurrying to the cemetery. Her soul felt tangled while her body refused to obey. Everything appeared familiar yet unbearably strange. Forgotten paths, the creak of branches, and the glow of lanterns stung her eyes. She was suffocating, exhausted, longing to return to the silence of the grave, to forget the burning heat of life. Stephen came back home, and one early morning met her again at the entrance. They kept silent like strangers, too afraid even to meet each other's gaze. Inside, an unbearable ache of sadness and pain burned. He stepped inside the apartment and noticed the comb with her hair left on the table. Barbara still cared for herself as if living between two worlds. Bad breath, absence of any scent, all this had become a torment for her. Barbara dreamed of peace and oblivion, her heart growing weary of beating among the living and shadows of the dead. Stephen decided to greet her at home, start a conversation, and try to understand what life remained within her. In the evening, he lit candles, prepared dinner, attempting to restore warmth even if only for a brief moment. His eyes drifted toward the comb. He touched the strands of hair, feeling the warmth of a story that was struggling against him. Inside Barbara, everything faded. The fog swallowed memories, feelings erased. She clung tightly to her recollections, but they slipped away like a scorching wind, blowing away the last grains of her soul. Finally, she entered her crimson atlas home, lay down on the cold bed, slowly dissolving into sleep. Her consciousness was fading gradually, and amid the pale Mariva, a voice pleading for peace barely could be heard. Stephen sat at the table in the empty room, holding a comb in his hands, staring at the cold chicken, the lifeless pineapple, and the bottle of champagne. He knew that tomorrow the agency would announce the premature cessation of the medication's effect. But for now, he simply waited silently, enduring his pain. Have you talked? A question echoed in his mind like a voice from the reception. He only shook his head. Tears filled his eyes, intended for a world far beyond the silence and the cold light. Somewhere out there, in the darkness of night, Barbara was beginning once again her endless journey toward oblivion and memory, toward the grave and the final warmth. Shadows thickened, and outside the window, a new dawn was lazily preparing to devour the darkness. The final evening of illusions. The moonlight. Candles flickered in the room. Their flames danced on the walls, creating a magical atmosphere. The man wished to offer her to bring back the lost warmth. Every preparation Stephen saw as a small ritual in the fight against despair. He feared that this evening might become yet another test of their strength and feelings, for Barbara still had not arrived. Her half living state prevented her from holding on to the world they called home. Moments of heart filling with hope changed so quickly into anxiety. Today she seemed especially distant and incomprehensible. The man covered the tablecloth, ready for whatever the night would bring. He created an artificial harmony, a delicate balance they could now experience only together while waiting to confront what remained of past love and fading memories. The phone resting silently in the corner of the room emitted a quiet that to Stephen felt almost unbearable. He imagined Barbara wandering through the fog of her own immobility along narrow winding paths in shadowy places, carefully avoiding the light from lamps that disturbed her half-living mind. Her breathing mechanisms often faltered, becoming irregular and labored, making each breath harsh and alien to her own self. Stephen understood deeply that within her soul she longed to return to calmness, to that rare moment when exhaustion would dissolve into the embrace of eternity. Yet an inexplicable force still held her suspended in that ghostly space between life and death. He was profoundly troubled, fully aware that the contract with the life extension agency, signed impulsively in a moment of despair, had forever bound them together with ties that the law could never sever. Agatha, a young administrator, listened to his plea to halt the effects of the revival drug with a mixture of reverence and gentle sorrow, but the response remained unchanged. No pharmaceutical remedy for such counteractions had yet been developed. Furthermore, no one was willing to assume responsibility for the potential consequences of a second death and resurrection. Essentially, it amounted to stealing from death its eternal right. Meanwhile, Stephen, visiting his old friend Emery, the psychologist, wrestled with these memories and the haunting reality before them. He hoped to discover at least some thread linking them within this tangled web of unseen emotions and fears. Emery listened intently to Stephen's stories, absorbing every detail and focusing on the husband's torment, worn down by loneliness and pain, because the woman he loved had become only a shadow of herself. The old friend suggested trying psychotherapeutic approaches involving denial and acceptance to help face reality. Still, it was clear that no simple answers lay in this tragedy. Each passing night without Barbara intensified his feeling of endless loss, every time hope shattered against the harsh concrete of relentless reality. Memories of Dominic, the mysterious figure from Barbara's past, floated increasingly into her fading recollections. His delicate face and words, once spoken during the warmth of summer, now appeared as ghosts, fragile shadows attempting to revive forgotten fragments of her soul. Dominic was the one who awakened what remained of her emotions and hopes, yet his presence caused Stephen to close his heart even more tightly, fueling a blend of resentment and fear. After all, the past could destroy the faint connection still holding Barbara at the brink of light. Zoe, who had revived earlier than the others, became a true symbol that life could continue no matter what. Her example stirred conflicting emotions in Barbara, an exciting hope mixed with a chilling dread of losing yet another small piece of herself. Zoe was able to communicate, and recalling her bright image only accentuated the darkness surrounding what was happening to Barbara. She was fading slowly, worn down by the very medicine meant to bring her life, instead causing stagnation and a gradual disappearance. Stephen found himself increasingly caught in the thought that Agatha's words and the quietly spoken prophecy at the agency counter about the impossibility of changing fate were coming true. She looked at him with sadness, understanding how difficult it was for her husband to wrestle with the invisible line separating life and death, love and fear. His attempts to speak to Barbara and offer moments of warmth and attention clashed with the distrust and distance she could no longer overcome. He was afraid to touch her, even more terrified of the moment when she might cease to recognize him altogether. As night slowly spread across the city, Barbara clung to the faintest threads of memory and feeling, desperately trying to grasp why she was returning to this world. A slight chill ran over her skin, not just her skin, but the whole body, which no longer responded to simple pleasures. The ambient city sounds faded away, as if dissolving into emptiness, while her breathing grew more labored. In such moments of awakening, she only wished to return once again to the blissful calm that now seemed so unreachable. Stephen sat at the table, holding a comb with Barbara's golden strands. It was the only thing connecting him to her in the absence of her living presence. His. His heart was torn between the wish to bring back what was lost and the fear that even the best effort might only make things worse for both of them. He set a simple yet elegant table, hoping that the warmth of the evening would chase away the chill of loneliness, yet he understood this was only a fleeting illusion that would vanish with the first light of dawn. The floor felt cold beneath his feet in the room, and Stephen sensed time slowing down, stretching each moment of waiting to its breaking point. Tomorrow he had to return to the agency and find out what had happened to Barbara during the night, why the protection spell ceased functioning earlier than expected. The answers promised to be painful and demanded more courage than he had been willing to admit before. He feared not hearing her voice, and later the sobbing, tears men were not used to showing, but which would inevitably burst forth at the most unexpected moment. That was why he waited until the very last moment, holding on to hope through the flickering candles and the emptiness shared with Barbara. This night was destined to be the final intertwining of their fates, sinking into the icy waters of illusions and unsolved mysteries. His heart hammered loudly in his chest, desperately reminding him of a living love that could still be saved, though in a completely different way than before. Standing at the threshold of the next chapter in their story was something unknown and terrifying, but Stephen was ready to face it because he could no longer live any other way. Moving toward the future, Stephen cast one last look at a flickering flame, a deep breath gathered from fading strength, set the stage for a night destined to change their shared fate. Barbara was nearby somewhere, moving silently through layers of time and memory along a path she had yet to walk. Perhaps within this uncertain future, answers were developing that only the brave could discover and embrace. Realms exist between life and death. Moonlight gently flooded the room, casting a cool silvery glow. Suddenly the silence was pierced by a phone ringing, and Barbara startled in her chair, turning her head toward the sound, squinting. "Hello?" she whispered hoarsely, gripping the receiver tightly. "My son, I will come at midnight. Do not lock the door and wear your most beautiful lingerie." Stephen's voice was soft and warm, causing a flush to rise on Barbara's cheeks. "All right," she replied with a smile. "You will definitely not change your plans." "Of course," her husband hastened to assure her. "I cannot talk more, sorry." The line went dead. Carefully, Barbara set the phone down and gazed out the window. In 6 hours, dawn would arrive, meaning it was time to return to her new refuge in the cemetery. Her eyes widened in surprise. Who could have called? A hoarse, nervous chuckle echoed in the empty room. Since Barbara had died and started coming home every evening, several months had passed. The first days were quiet, the hot sun did not disturb, and only the rustling of earthly insects broke the peace. But now groundwater was eroding her new dwelling. What troubled her more were the memory lapses that grew increasingly profound. At times, Barbara could not even recall where or why she returned each evening. Something mysterious was pulling her upwards. She struggled to break through the soil and then, amazed by the fresh air, staggered along the narrow marble paths. Perhaps sometimes her mind found no peace other than in final death, which no one dared to repeat due to the lack of legal grounds. Why did you decide to extend your wife's life? Agatha asked with a hint of sadness in her voice. You brought her here yourself. Stephen stepped aside toward the doorway and replied thoughtfully, I was foolish. I feared losing her completely. I hoped to restore everything as it was before. But now she is half alive. Her soul is partially foreign. I realized this when I met her on the first day after the funeral. She did not recognize me. She passed by, cold and pale. I was scared to go back home. Now she comes at night and waits for me. But why? I'm afraid to touch her. I cannot live anywhere. The contract forbids changing the place of return. The phrase, unchanging location for the entire duration of the treatment, stuck in my mind. Maybe I should try talking to her? Ask her not to come, Agatha suggested sympathetically, looking at Stephen. We have never encountered such cases before. It is unclear if she will respond. Usually, only a distant longing for living loved ones remains in memory. Faces are forgotten, but places remember. What now should we do? The man's question sounded helpless and confused. The girl replied softly, Others live like this. We have many satisfied clients too. Maybe a psychologist could help. There are experts specialized in dealing with denial of reality and various forms of detachment from the present. Don't continue, Stephen interrupted and left. Barbara hurried to the cemetery. Today felt unusual and burdensome for her. On the stairwell landing, he met Barbara once again. He tried to start a conversation, but fear seemed to paralyze his speech. She looked even more lifeless than the last time. They passed silently as strangers, like lovers on unfamiliar paths. The man went upstairs and looked around. Her hair was lying on the comb. She still combed it, leaving it just as before. He wondered if she could even realize her own condition. A deep sorrow boiled within Stephen's soul. A decision had to be made. It was impossible to keep living in this unbearable anticipation. The problem should be dealt with by the one who created it. It was decided to meet with his wife the next night and speak frankly. Would she understand? I will not know until I ask, he muttered, staring intently at the comb. Unable to resist, he tugged on a few strands of hair. They broke just like those of a living person. Everything is decided, he said to himself, then began to prepare dinner by candlelight, trying to create a special mood for their meeting. His heart filled with hope that his words would find a way to her cold heart. Barbara inhaled deeply the air in her new dwelling. All smells had vanished. Around her reigned complete silence. No sounds of the city, not a whisper of leaves, nor a bird's cry. Even the scent of tuberose and the buzzing of insects belonged to a distant past. Her new existence was numb and hollow. She began to comprehend what lay within the grave. It was better there than in the cold emptiness surrounding her now. Her heart yearned for shelter, and she groped her way back to the resting place. A white haze enveloped the space. I hope I don't wake up tomorrow, she murmured, but her voice blended seamlessly with the silence. Let me never return to this world devoid of feeling. Only the throbbing at her temples reminded her she was still alive. She caught a fleeting glimpse of a gap in the boards draped with crimson satin, slipped through and lay down. Calmness returned, her body seemed to dissolve, and lightness filled her mind. The last cell of her fading mind struggled to recall someone's name. It slipped away, caught by the wind, vanishing into the distance. Barbara was retreating into the quiet of a silent planet. Night regained control outside once again. Stephen set the table, lit the candles, placed the cool down grilled chicken and pineapple, and prepared a glass of champagne. He twirled the comb in his hands, tangled with his wife's hair, the only token that still connected him to Barbara. Tomorrow he would visit the agency again, seeking answers about what had happened, why the body ceased to return. Agatha, the woman with delicate lips, would once more ask about the conversation with his wife. Stephen would only shake his head and close his eyes where masculine, heavy tears would appear. The room was filled with silence, heavy with bitterness and despair, as though everything that once existed between them was slipping away forever. Many questions remained unresolved, yet time urged them forward. The truth about the world between life and death, the impossibility of reclaiming what was lost, grew unbearable for both parties. Thus, led by a heavy silence, the conclusion opened a door to a new chapter where hopes and regrets intertwined as one.